DaFAQ!
Big K, I love Tsugaru Shamisen. What's with all the extra skin around the sides? Excellent question, Beefcake Jim. This is an area of shamisen which many people very reasonably misunderstand. One of the most recognizable elements of a shamisen prepared for Tsugaru style is the overhang of skin around the sides of the dough. Compared to classical styles, it's much wider, and many people will deduce that Tsugaru style uses a higher skin tension and also has a wider overhang than other shamisen styles. So logic would suggest that more skin is needed on the sides to hold a tighter skin down. A very, very reasonable theory. But when we learn a little bit about the Tsugaru style origin story, very popular term with the kids, you'll find that there's absolutely no connection between the length of skin on the sides and the tension of the skin on the top surface. Before we jump into history, please know that a little bit of overhang is needed to hold natural skin down, especially when it's tightly stretched. For tight skin, once it's been glued to the dough and the clamps are removed, the craftsman has to quickly glue the sides of the skin down as fast as he can. If he waits too long, the skin will peel off the dough by the power of its own tension. It's happened to me once with shamisen. In any case, overhang is required. And for the overhang to do anything, the lacquer has to be sanded off the dough. For classical styles, only a few millimeters is sanded, from the top edge down. Just a little rim there is sanded off. And for higher tension, for shamisen prepared for Tsugaru style, about 10 millimeters is often sanded off. And it's when the skin adheres to bare wood with the glue, that's what does the gripping. Any skin that's glued to the lacquered area offers no real gripping support. And as you'll find out, there's no correlation between the length of overhang and the tension of skin. So let's jump into the history. In the mid-1800s, the founders of what became the original Tsugaru style weren't wielding tight-skinned, super-figured, thick-neck shamisen. They were blind beggars. They started learning shamisen as young boys. They would learn from a veteran blind beggar. And when they had the basic skills, they would go out and earn money or food by playing door to door. These blind beggars were called bolsama, meaning monk. It was an incredibly hard existence. As Chikuzan Takashi alludes to in his autobiography, the bolsama weren't playing shamisen for the arts. It was purely a means of survival, and they used any shamisen that was available. Now with that in mind, let's jump ahead to some facts about skinning. In the links below, I've got some videos of the skinning process. Have a look at those for context, and in the meantime, I will mention some key points that relate to this story. When a natural skin is prepared to stretch on a dough, no matter the style, the wooden clamps called kisen always need about 2 centimeters of skin to grip onto. After the skin has been stretched and glued to the dough and the kisen are removed, the craftsman will glue the sides of the skin down, like we discussed before. And then to make a clean, crisp look for classical styles, that extra skin is trimmed off. Well, that extra skin is what the clamps need to grip on. And so if the skin were to separate from the dough, it couldn't be re-stretched or re-glued back on because the clamps have nothing to grip onto. This didn't matter for classical styles, they would just use new skin. However, the shamisen life of these blind beggars wasn't about the style, the art, or the tone. The one thing they could not afford was to replace the skin with a new one. And so they did 2 main things to ensure its longevity. And this really gets to the answer of the initial question. First, back in those days, natural skin was much weaker than the kind available now. They couldn't risk the skin rupturing from being too tight, and so they would keep it very loose. Not a satisfying sound at all, but again, the shamisen was a survival tool for them, not an artistic pursuit. Next, for those who don't know, the glue used for attaching the skin was basically just cooked rice. That's water soluble, and the Tsugaru region is known for being very snowy and rainy. The bolsama, were exposed to the elements a lot, and if their skin, got a taste of the snow and rain, the moisture would dissolve the glue, and then the skin would naturally separate from the dough. Well, they needed to be able to use that same skin when it came off the dough. And remember how the classical styles would trim off the skin needed for the clamps? Well, the bowl-sama would just keep that skin on. And so when that skin got wet and separated from the dough, a craftsman only needed to reapply fresh rice glue, put on the clamps again, re-stretch it at a low tension, and it was ready for the bowl-sama to play again. And that's why the extra skin is there, not as support to keep a tight skin held down, but rather was a way to re-stretch what was very loose skin. Once Tsugaru style went from its hand-to-mouth livelihood and started being used for artistic pursuit, the skins were no longer reused. It would be stretched tighter for a better tone and would be fully replaced when the fresh tone eventually degraded. So the extra skin for the clamps wasn't necessary anymore, but it remained on the dough because it's such a visually iconic part of the Tsugaru style's history. The length has even changed over the decades. In the 80s and 90s, it was much longer and sometimes covered most of the dough. Recently, a shorter overhang has become in vogue. While normally the length is around 25 millimeters, some Tsugaru players I know have that cut almost in half. Not as short as jiuta style, but very cleanly trimmed. Style. Anywho, I hope you learned something. Kyle Abbott,